Welcome back, Clone Club. We are breaking down Season 5, Episode 7, Gag or Throttle. I'm Will Link. As you can see, I am alone again. Not all alone. I got Helena with me, of course. Sadly, Megan had some things come up, and for the rest of the week our schedules weren't matching up, so I figured rather than deprive you of an Orphan Black recap, I'd hit you up myself again. And I had to, because this is a great episode. This is an all-timer as far as specifically a character study, and a character study of Rachel Duncan. This is a Rachel episode I have been predicting and hoping for years. Anyone who watched me back on AfterBuzz knows that from the introduction of her villainous, cold, icy bitch character, I have predicted that we would get a Rachel redemption. And this was the episode in which we finally got it. We finally saw her do the right thing. We finally saw her, even if it was a little begrudgingly and drunkenly, do the right thing for Sarah, do the right thing for Kira, and send her back to her mother. There's a lot to unpack here. Much like earlier in the season when we got Alison flashbacks and a few episodes where we got Cosima to talk about her parents, we get Rachel's youth here. And it begins with a very young-looking Dr. Leakey. Matt Frewer, always good to see him in anything, and always good to see him back as Leakey. Showing off the young Rachel to the other Neolutionists, the other people on the board, as Rachel is introduced as the only self-aware clone. And we already see the makings of who this woman will become. She's very direct, cold, fidgety with the way she's picking at her nails. We see the seeds of the woman who she will become with the young clone. Also, it's just fun to see the actress who plays Charlotte, whose name do I not have written down because I'm terrible. But it is fun to see her get to stretch a little bit too and be stiffer and as Rachel. This cuts to present day, and we see that Rachel is controlling the board. She's gone from being the test subject to being in charge, but little does she know, and she'll find out throughout the episode, how not in charge she actually is. I loved all these early scenes. I loved Tatiana's performance as Rachel, just the physicality of it. She's still walking with the slightest of limps, like she's still not completely recovered. And that's great, and that's smart, and that makes sense. And, it's just those little things that Tatiana keeps adding to the character, to the physicality of the character. So we see Rachel, she's basically blackmailing the board. When one board member basically brings up questions what's going on, she's like, well, we cured your daughter from her heart condition. What's that worth? So she now, much in the same way that Leakey introduced her back in the day as the only self-aware clone, she now introduces Kira to these people. Kira is the Eve. Kira is the thing that is going to basically solve dying. Basically, it's the thing that in theory will keep PT going and Neolutionists in general. And it's a creepy little moment, and it's a moment that worried me for Rachel and Rachel's soul. And it's interesting I talk about Rachel's soul because she's been such a villainous character, but I've been rooting for this redemption even after she tried to kill Sarah on more than one occasion. So to see her showing off Kira in the same way she had been shown off was upsetting. And I wasn't sure whether it was going to hold, and I started to think maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Rachel is all in on Neo's and P.T. Westmoreland. But Kira is her mother's daughter, and she is working the hustle on Rachel. She is, early in the episode, she makes her a friendship bracelet. And Rachel tells this story about how she made a friend of hers friendship bracelet back at summer camp. Which is just, it's this weird humanizing story that then becomes totally not humanizing when it's basically asked if she still knows the friend's like, no. But what's really important about what Kira's doing, it's that whole idea of when people are being held hostage, try to make the hostage taker look at you as human. And she's doing that to Rachel in a way. She's reminding her, I'm the sweet little girl. I can love you. I'm capable of, we can be friends. And gives her this friendship bracelet. And, you know, we've seen for a while that Rachel has some affection for Kira. Back when Kira was originally taken in by Dyad, Rachel wanted to care for Kira. Rachel wanted to, like, be her mother. You know, probably in part because Rachel couldn't have children. And also, you know, Rachel had a terrible mom. She had a terrible dad. And maybe there was a way, I always felt she was going to try to atone for that and be a good mother to Kira, even though by taking her away from her real mother, she would be a horrendous human being. But that's why I've always believed that Kira was the key to this Rachel redemption. And as we go further down this episode, we will see that. So Rachel is going to head back to the island. Meanwhile, Kira is going to have her sleep, quote-unquote, monitored, where really they are giving her hormone injections so they can harvest her eggs. And it's going to be clear that Dr. Cody on the island is the one who is going to be doing this harvesting. She wants to cure Lita just as much as Rachel does. And the second Rachel meets Cody, she is very dubious of this, as she should be. She knows about Cody. She knows Cody's methods, and as bad as Susan was, Cody is worse. When Rachel does get to the island, she goes to her mother's gravesite and leaves some flowers, and then we get confirmation in the gravestone next to her that Ira did die at the end of the last episode. I know I had, when we recorded our recap, I had said I thought Ira would still be around, and I kind of wanted some Ira revenge on Cody. But in the period of time shortly after we recorded our recap last week, there was an interview with Ari Millman. Some of you posted it to the YouTube comments, where he said that had been the end of Ira. So I kind of knew that, but, you know, we see his gravesite buried next to his beloved Susan, the woman he loved. I wish Megan were here because she would cringe over me emphasizing that. But, hey, it's true. He loved her. We also get flashbacks of Rachel's first meeting with P.T. Westmoreland. And, like I said before, Rachel has always searched for a father figure. Later in the episode, she talks about how she asked Leaky if she could call him Dad. And in this episode, P.T. comes out and says that he's a father figure to her and that he believes in her. And nobody ever believed in Rachel because Rachel was always treated still with a little bit of distance because she was a Lita clone. She was a test subject. And this flashback's very interesting because you could see how this woman who just felt betrayed by her mother and stabbed her, and then gets taken in to meet Westmoreland, how he can manipulate her like that. Again, each week I keep mentioning Charlie Manson because he's the prototypical cult leader. But, again, it's classic cult behavior that PT's using to manipulate all these people. Also, we see that the revolt against PT did not quite work. This was a weak link in the episode last week where the revolt kind of sprung up, and I guess it just kind of fizzled out. It does look like his home is a little more reinforced, which makes me think that there was a lot of pushback, that there were enough PT loyalists to push the other people back. I kind of half expected PT to be on the run and his home burned down, but that is not the case. I'm wondering if there will be any more island revolt. I was kind of surprised we went back to the island this week as well, but really we went back to the island in terms of a laboratory and Cody's there. We didn't go back to it in terms of revival and mud and stuff like that. And again, I wonder if we're ever going to see those people again. If we don't, I'm not going to be heartbroken. I'm not going to be too upset if we never see Mud again, even though she was an alright character. Okay, so basically, she goes back to the lab where Cody is, back to the lab on the island, and they want to examine her. And at this point, Rachel is even more dubious. You could see a little fear in her. She's getting fidgety again. She doesn't want to have an examination. And at this point, we cut back to one of her examinations with Dr. Leakey, where he says that she is not exempt from the experiment. And it's a good reminder that after Kira tried to humanize her relationship with Rachel, these other people, PT and Cody, now dehumanize her. They devalue her as a person. We saw in the flashback Westmoreland allowed Rachel to be emancipated, that she would no longer be property of Dyad. And now, here again, she sees on the computer they're using her code name, her identification number for Lita. And that they are examining her, and she's not trusting it entirely. Now, granted, this is a little tricky to figure out what Rachel's thinking, because on one hand, they do need to cure Lita. They do need to do research, but on the other hand, suddenly this is being taken away from her. She was in charge of this. It's not even Cosima, another Sestra, who is doing this. It's Dr. Cody now. So I could see Rachel getting very worried about the way this is all starting to go down. Back to the emancipation thing, and this is another thing I have been talking about for about 5 years, discussing Orphan Black with you guys. I still think it's total BS that these clones would be actually considered property. That if they ever outed themselves, I still feel that they would win the inevitable court case. You can't own people. But they do own the genetic material, and they do own that, and that's a little trickier. I think that's where formerly Dyad, now just the Neolutions, have a case where they would own the genetic material. Rachel is a human being. They can't hold her against her will, but they can keep that genetic material. They do own that. So that's why I've always found the emancipate the clone things a little weird. But then again, it's also terrifying. If someone said they owned all my genetic material, I would be upset about that, and I would, even if it was just psychologically, I would feel like I was being held captive. So that's the thing I've always thought was curious, and I got to admit, there's always been a weird part of me that wanted the show to divert into some strange like, not courtroom drama, but yeah, courtroom drama of, like, the clones are on trial. Like, will they be granted their humanity? The Supreme Court steps in and decides, We've got, we've got the Supreme Court justices. Well, John Roberts make the deciding decision on if the clones are human beings or not. But it's probably better the show didn't go down that route. Anyway, so we see in more flashbacks of Rachel, including one where she had a different hairstyle. She was willing, basically for the acceptance of, basically in a way to be in control of the experiments, to be part of Neolution and Dyad and everything. She was going extra steps that were even too far for Leaky. They even crossed lines for him. We see that she killed a clone who was already sick, but she, sped that along. A clone called Miriam, and Leaky points out, like, she was artistic. Leaky humanized her, and Rachel is just, she was homeless, killed her, we need to move along with this experiment. And that's because Rachel is also afraid of dying, too. She is afraid of getting this disease, like the rest of her sisters. She has a sense of her own mortality. So she was always going to be involved in these experiments for two reasons. Like I said, one, fear of getting the disease herself, and two, wanting to be the boss bitch in control. She wanted to be part of this. She wanted to feel like she was part of the board or in charge of the board instead of them being in charge of her. And everything we've seen with her character over these seasons has all been about that, whether it's trying to control her mother, her sestras, or Dyad itself. And the flashbacks, I thought, did a great job of having us understand that journey that she's been on as a character. I really loved them. Even seeing Rachel at her coldest, killing Miriam and doing an autopsy on her, in a weird way it humanized her. And it also set us up for the stuff that I was very excited about in this episode, which starts around now. Rachel overhears Simon tell PT that she has developed an attachment for Kira, which is true. We've all known that. We've all seen that. But Rachel assures him, nervously, scratching her nails, picking at her cuticles, that she's willing to go the extra step. She's willing to bring Kira to him. But you never get a sense of what Rachel's really thinking in this episode, because we know she's also starting to worry about herself, worry about the way she's being treated. And again, Rachel, because she's so cold, you don't know what she's thinking, which makes her so dangerous, and what made this episode so suspenseful. She goes and sneaks through PT's drawer, and she finds his kind of tablet. And on the tablet, she discovers that everything that has been in her new Neo Eye, he's able to see. It's not just that they're able to send her information through that eye, which we'd seen last season with the dead swan. They're seeing everything she does, which now this is beyond a violation. In a weird way, it's one thing to say, we own some of your genetic material. That's a violation. But now it's not only are we... And remember, PT said they weren't monitoring her anymore. But now not only no monitors... let me take that back. There's an ultimate monitor now. PT is monitoring her through her eye. So she's been lied to. And it's one thing to say they're going to take your genetic material or run these tests on you, which ultimately could end up saving your life, even though it's creepy. They are watching every moment of her life. That is incredibly violating. And she at this moment feels incredibly violated. She realizes they've seen everything she's seen. And if you think back about that, they've seen everything since she's gotten that eye put in. Including her BDSM session with Ferdinand. You know, that's got to be humiliating in a lot of ways. She makes a point earlier, after she's being examined by Cody, about wanting privacy. And at this moment, she realizes she has no privacy and may never have privacy again. And what do you do about that? It's your eye. Well, we know what she ends up doing about it, but we'll get to that in a second. So, back at the house, Sarah, who, by the way, up until her last scene in this episode at Diane, Sarah has not left that house in over 2 episodes. Sarah has really been on the sidelines a lot lately. You know, it was nice she was spending some time with Kira, which was good, but really Sarah has been on the side. Wait, is this not true? Am I screwing up? Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I am screwing up. Sarah did leave the house. She sat in a car with Art while Crystal kicked Tom Cullen in the nuts. That's what happened. So Sarah did leave the house in the previous episode. But I think my mistake goes to a thing that Sarah has been on the sidelines. Sarah hasn't been active. She wasn't even really involved in the whole Crystal thing. She's basically been taking in information. She's been running, she's been basically running behind the scenes. And at the beginning of this episode, she tells S to calm down. She basically is like, we can't go in there guns blazing, which is kind of a funny reversal. But I understand why S is feeling this way, because S feels responsible because they took Kira. Cosima has also returned with Charlotte, and it's good to see Cosima back in the basement of the comic book shop at her little private lab. It was a nice little reunion with her and Scott. And she went all Jason Bourne, tried to trick him, sent a boat out there. They got back with just a compass and their Cosima's nautical skills. And Cosima comes back with some bad news for Sarah. They are going to harvest Kira's eggs. And this is horrific for a mother, and it is horrific also thinking how young she is. I mean, Sarah even says, like, she hasn't even gotten her period. And Cosima points out they'll pump her full of hormones, and you're born with all the eggs you'll ever have. So it's creepy. It's creepy to think that they're going to do this to a little girl. Meanwhile, Cosima is going to help them figure out who P.T. Westmoreland really is, so they can find a way to expose him to the board, because the idea is that the board has bought into this 170-year-old man routine. If that's proven a lie, the board will back off. He'll have no support. So they're working on this. I loved all the stuff where Cosima was going through, like, the old articles looking for someone who had died at Cambridge at that time in the 60s for a match, and her and Scott are going through all this. I thought all that stuff was great and fun. The stuff that is still a little too convoluted for me is this kind of follow the money thing. They brought up a Kuwaiti businessman who we had seen on the board earlier. He's the one that Rachel shuts down. All that stuff is getting a little convoluted for me, and I think one of the reasons why it's getting a little convoluted for me is because the research is being done by Delphine and Adele and Felix, who have not been in these episodes. We're not seeing them, what they're doing, discovering this stuff. The one thing that this final season, which I'm really loving, particularly this episode, but the one thing I'm not loving about this final season is the lack of Felix. We haven't had much Felix. His biggest part was probably, I guess, in the Alison-centric episode. Other than that, he's been really by the sidelines. And I am hoping we get to see what they're doing in Sweden. I'm hoping we get that next episode. So, that's a little convoluted. What I can wrap my head around is that they do the research to find out who PT really is. Rachel has now gone back to Dyad, where Kira is, and she's under orders. She has to bring Kira to the island. And Rachel is distraught. And again, we don't know totally whether it's because she's found out she's being lied to and spied on, or it's because she doesn't want to do this to Kira. It's probably a mixture of both. But we still don't know Rachel's motivations. We just see that she has decided to do what any reasonable person would do in this scenario, and it is to drink heavily. Not alcohol, obviously. It's early. But she is drinking heavily. She's making her martinis. And she realizes she has a choice to make. She's either going to hand over this little girl, or she's going to betray the trust and risk her own life by not going along with PT's plan. And we see her having a little bit of a breakdown. And there's a great scene from, I guess it was season 2, where Rachel is watching the old clips of her with her family and drinking, and she makes that smile, that creepy Rachel smile, forced smile that she makes. I guess it's not forced, but it feels it. And she's watching those videos again. PT is watching those videos too, with the eye. And he calls her up and is basically like, "Are you okay?" And she's like, yes, I'm, she's basically brushing it off. And she agrees to bring Kira in, and Kira is brought into that creepy video chat room and meets PT, and he's excited to meet her in person. And Rachel tells Simon that she's going to be the one to sedate her because she's the last face she should see at Dyad. And there was an interesting moment where, and I don't know if I wrote down the exact quote, but it was basically where Kira, again, humanizing things, said, like, "Who hurt you?" You're like, "Who hurt you, Rachel?" Kira, who is in all this danger, but because she's a hustler, she's still playing it up to Rachel. She's still like, "Who hurt you?" And Rachel says, "All of them." And at this moment, I started to believe in the Rachel redemption. I started to believe the fact that she wanted to be the one to sedate her. That she was going to do the right thing and give Kira back. However, because it's Rachel, you can never be 100% sure. Because it's Rachel, and because it's this show with twists and turns, you can never be 100% sure. And there was a moment where Rachel was back in her office, and she gives, she gets the call from Sarah, and she gets the article sent to her from Sarah, which basically, like, PT's a fraud, and Rachel is basically like, "Yeah, I know. I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm in charge. Whatever." And of course, this is terrifying to Sarah because Sarah has learned through her phone call with Kira and the brilliant little story they've constructed that they are going to bring the mouse, Kira, to Wonderland, the island, and she doesn't know how to stop. I mean, Sarah has a total breakdown at this point. It's very rare we've seen Sarah not jump right into action, but she, just falls to the floor and she doesn't know what to do other than get that information to Rachel and hope Rachel does the right thing. But Rachel lets Sarah know she's not going to do the right thing. Or is she? She puts the drugs in the orange juice, and in a pretty terrifying scene makes Kira drink it so she passes out. And again, this is what's so great about this episode and why I was on the edge of my seat watching this. You still aren't sure what Rachel's going to do. You think maybe she's going to do the right thing, but then when you see a scene where she's making her drink this juice, you start to really question, oh my God, is she really going to do the right thing? What is she going to do? Rachel is unpredictable. And she goes back, and she realizes that Sarah has to be taken down, so she tells Simon to, send in the team. But at the same time, she's, looking at a watch, distracting with the eye, and to the side. So PT just sees her like kind of in a daze. She's texting somebody. I thought it was Sarah. It was not Sarah. It was Art. And Art shows up and is basically like, we gotta get you out of here. You won't believe what just happened. Real quick about Art, people have brought up his partner wasn't in the last episode. She wasn't in this episode. A few of you have brought up, is Art off the leash? I don't think so. I think the leash might have gotten a little longer, but we haven't seen the last of his partner, Maddie. And I'm sure there'll be in the next couple episodes, something crazy will happen involving her and Art. So, Rachel goes to meditate. And while she's meditating, she, obviously closes her eyes. And while her eyes are closed, she puts on her eye patch. And PT's looking at this a little curious. And, he doesn't know an eye patch is on her, obviously, but, he senses something's up. Because it is an odd time to start meditating. And then we see Rachel with the eye patch go and get Kira and wheel her out, still with that little limp, and also probably having trouble seeing. Wheel her to the elevator where Art, S, and Sarah are there waiting. And Rachel did the right thing. Rachel redeemed herself in the end and betrayed the people who raised her, the people who showed her everything she knew. She betrayed, who are evil fucking people. But she betrayed them. She went against everything she'd kind of been raised to. They raised a monster in a way. They basically, again, go with the Frankenstein thing. PT basically helped guide her, felt like a father figure, and she, to them, then betrayed them and did something monstrous. Obviously, she did the right thing for the sisters, the right thing morally. She gave Kira back to her mother, and obviously now, Kira, maybe even Art, and of course Sarah, they're all going to be on the run. And Rachel goes back to her office. She's still drinking. And I don't know. Obviously, this took a lot of liquid courage. She's getting the projections of PT trying to send her messages in her eye. She doesn't know what to do at this point, I think. I think she's at her wit's end. But she knows she can't have the PT watching everything she does. She also knows she's about to be on the outs with Neolution. And she breaks the glass, and she sees the pointy end, the stem of the glass. And in maybe the most horrific scene, and there have been some horrific scenes, but maybe in the most horrific scene the series has done, she rips out her own eyeball to basically, and it's basically an FU to Neolution, FU to PT, and it frees her. It frees her in a way that she's never been freed before. When the episode ends, she is bleeding profusely. She's in bad shape. And I don't think they would have her fully die off screen, but I didn't think that about Ira last week. I don't think Rachel is going to be dead, but she's losing a lot of blood. I think we're going to have one more redemptive moment from Rachel. I think we might have one more moment where she helps take down all of this. But, Rachel... I don't know. Do you feel bad for Rachel? I feel bad for Rachel. Let me know if you do, because I might be alone in this. I've been preaching Rachel redemption. I've been hoping for the best from Rachel. And I always believed a lot of you out there did too, because she's still a Sestra. She's got Tatiana Maslany's a face we've come to love. How can we totally hate her? So, I don't know. Maybe I'm being a little Pollyannish, but I think this was a great redemption for Rachel. I still think there could be even more, and I hope she is not dead. I wonder, I've often said I thought that she would die in this series and die helping the Sestras, which if she did die at the end of this episode, that would be the case. But, there is also part of me that in the one last clone dinner, it'll be like Helena, like, passing her some babka, and, Helena, a character who's been redeemed, offering some redemption for Rachel. I don't know, these are some just dream scenarios. I would love to see Rachel as one of the Sestras. I would love to see her try. So there were other Sestras in this episode that we got to get to. Getting all emotional about what I want to see from Rachel. It's very strange. There's more going on with Cody. Cody wants Helena. Cody wants Helena's magic babies. And there's somebody who knows how to get Helena, apparently. We don't understand how he knows, but Mark. Mark, the last of the Castor boys. And when they are standing over Ira's grave, he gives Cody this... I found it to be a very awkward hug. Like, Mark doesn't really know how to feel about all this. All his brothers are dead. Not that he liked his brothers all that much. But basically, Mark has agreed to help Cody find Helena if Cody gives him the cure. He's in love with Gracie. They've been on the run. And Gracie always looks at him basically to see if he's glitching. And he can't take this. Their relationship can't take this. So Mark, he decides to... He has to go back to Cody, and he has to go back to finding a cure, because it's the only way his relationship with Gracie can be normalized, as much as a Prolethean relationship can be normalized. There's an interesting moment where he's asked to give an ejaculate sample, and I remembered his, deeply weird religious background, this is gonna be, he's gonna go masturbate into a cup, that's gotta be awkward for Mark. But there's another thing that's brought up. Mark is a traitor. Mark is always a traitor. I want to just point this out, that Mark might be the least trustworthy character on this show. Mark betrayed Castor, he betrayed the Proletheans, he betrayed the Sestras. He betrays everyone, and it's all for the love of Gracie. We also see Gracie does know where Helena is. Again, I wonder if we'll figure out how. And Gracie shows up at the convent, and Helena basically asks what she's doing there, and that's all we get! I actually thought, because I'd seen that in the preview, that this was going to be not a Rachel-centric episode until Tatiana Maslany started tweeting out some Rachel stuff. I thought this was going to be a Helena-centric episode, and I still believe we are getting a Helena-centric episode where we see some of her background, but I thought for sure this was going to be like Helena gives birth, it's all about Helena. Maybe next week's episode will be. We'll get to that in a second, because the preview for next week's episode is amazing. So, the one last person to talk about is Alison, who is back from California. God knows what she was doing. She was hanging out with youngins, followers of Carl Jung. Um, I had thought from the preview last week where we see Donnie like, Alison, like, that it wasn't really Alison, it was someone pretending to be Alison, because we weren't seeing it, but no, it's Alison with short purple hair, and a tattoo that says, live deep, not liver deep. Alison is losing her goddamn mind still. I thought she might come back calmer, but this to me screams like a false sense of calm. It seems like another version of a cult in a way. This transformation, this quote-unquote transformation that she's going through, I don't imagine this will hold. Alison's got to be Alison. Alison's got to be a little more tightly wound, because that's the woman Donnie loves. That's the woman we all love. Getting rid of her crafts, bringing a keyboard, although that could be cool. Donnie will be playing the bass or the drums, and Alison said, no. I'm not controlling anymore. You don't make a turn that fast. This screams just like when she went to rehab. This screams too quick a turn. She wasn't gone all that long. She's talking about her shadow self. It's very funny. It was back to the suburban comedy that we love from Alison, and I actually hope that we get a little bit more of it before the series ends. But there was the moment where he said, liver deep, and she corrected him. She's like, live deep. And the way she corrected him was very cutting. So, I don't think our old Alison is gone, nor do I want her gone. There has to be a happy medium here for Alison. And I think, I'll be curious to see what we get in the next few episodes out of Alison. I had predicted we wouldn't get much of her, but now I think we're going to get a little more suburban comedy, and I'm hoping that now that Alison is gone through this transformation one way, I hope she brings it back to the middle a little bit, and maybe that's the perfect ground for her. Look, she needed to go do what she had to do, but, this also isn't Alison. This is somebody else, This is, I don't mean a clone, another clone. In this show, you got to be careful with your words, but this is not her, and I'm curious to see what comes of this. I think that is everything. I'm going to check super fast on Twitter if any of you guys had time to send me questions. I know I'm recording this earlier than usual, so you might not have been able to. Also, again, Megan, sadly, our schedules, things just did not seem to work out for us this week to do this together. We'll be back next week, and of course the last 3 episodes will be back together. Like I said, something came up. I'm sure later in the week, if you want to tweet some questions at Megan, don't do it yet, because I don't know if she's had a chance to watch because of the stuff she's doing. But if you want to tweet at her later in the week, maybe, I'm sure she will have some views. The only person who wrote me back so far this morning is Nikki D, who I always love hearing from. And yes, she wrote back, "Oh shit, Sweet Redemption, you got it." I'm going to give that a retweet right now. I've been wanting this Rachel redemption forever, and I'm glad to see other people are excited that it has happened. I was half wrong because she also goes on to say, I was half wrong because Ira died, but Cody's still pursuing cure for Mark. He has gone rogue, selling out Helena and Bebes. Do you think Gracie is in on it? That's a good question. There is an equal chance that Gracie has gone to Helena to warn her. As much as it was like, oh, maybe she's there, like, there's a good chance that Gracie has gone there to warn her. I think, Nikki, you might be right about that. Yeah. Okay. I'm glad I checked my phone. So next week, Megan will be back. But what the hell is the episode about? The preview for next week was just a bunch of words telling us they can't show us anything because it's going to be so damn crazy. Which makes me think Helena's going to be involved for some reason because that's always the craziest stuff. I don't know how it could get crazier than Rachel ripping out her own eye. But, yeah, it sounds like it will. Also, in Tatiana Maslany news, there was a great interview. I think it was an interview magazine or online. I don't know. Or magazines. Or magazine is it the same thing now? Like when you say like, oh, I read this in Time magazine. Is it just an article online? Is that still Time magazine? I don't know. But there's an interview. Seek it out. That the terrific actress Uzo Aduba, Emmy winner as Suzanne Crazy Eyes from Orange is the New Black, does a fun little interview with Tatiana Maslany, and they talk a lot about acting, but they also talk about their love of Jesus Christ Superstar, and they talk about Tatiana's new movie Stronger, which is coming out in September, so you might want to read that. Okay, so that is it. Like I said, next week Megan will be back. Apologies for just having me. But like I said, our schedules didn't work out beyond today. And I did not want to wait till halfway through the week to talk about this episode with you. So until next time, we'll see you then, Clone Club.